Hey guys, thanks for coming out. Um, my name's Chad Patterson. A lot of you guys have known me for a long time. I've lived in Greenville for about 20 years. Um, did a lot of work around. I moved to Greenville when I was around 20. Worked with a bunch of guys in here in the resort real estate business for a while. Um, Mostly as a freelancer early on. About around the time that you know 2008 hit, we all kind of did a bunch of different stuff. The real estate wasn't really doing it, and digital was happening. So, it was around that time. It's probably about 10, 12 years ago. I decided to, I have a background in fine arts, and I always wanted to take uh, art and inject it somehow into the corporate world, and I didn't quite, it's kind of in a process. I didn't quite know how to do that. But as far as like illustrative branding and bringing illustration into projects and trying to develop my own style, it's certainly been a process. I'm going to go through, I think about 10 years ago, I was determined to figure out a style that I could use. So instead of, working uh, working to please the group or working to please the client necessarily. And I know this is a bad thing to say, but if I could bring my style to the table, people would come to me for what I do instead of me diluting my work for the project. So, um, I'm going to kind of walk through some of the work I've done. A lot of the inspiration for this work came from skateboard culture, to be honest with you. Southern California, I grew up, with a power Peralta skateboard, and, some of those famous illustrators came from that. Everything comes from Southern California, like rap culture, and there's so many things developed out of that area. And I always loved this fine lined illustration style. And uh, on top of that, I had a background in calligraphy from early on. So trying to mix calligraphy and illustration was something I really wanted to do, and I spent a long time trying to develop that. I've had one job in my life, and that was about uh, 6 or 8 years ago. I worked at a company called EP. A few of you guys have worked at EP, and it was around the time I was having a kid, and the markets were changing a little bit, and I was like, I'm going to go ask, because I'd freelanced for EP for a long time, and I called my friend Corey Shear. I don't know if you guys know Corey Shear, but he's a good friend of mine, and I said, hey man, I'm looking to do something different. I don't know what to do, and he's like, well, come over and work in my experiential on my experiential team, and we'll figure something out. We could use your illustration skill, and we could, maybe you'd learn a few things. But working at an agency is probably it's probably the best. Because I never went to art school. I've always been self-taught, and I've always just kind of developed my own thing. But going to a place like that with so much talent, and you know anybody knows anything about EP, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the whole company was changing. Several rounds of layoffs, and they I bounced around from like 5 different disciplines. So I worked on the social team, and I worked on the experiential team, and I learned a lot of things about a lot of things, which has made me a good consultant, I would say. Um, but anyway, thinking about how I started to develop this style of illustration is basically where I started. And this was one of this is a company called Yeehaw Brewing. I believe there's one in Greenville. And kind of one of the first projects that I saw that I really wanted to do. It was a small client, and EP was kind of pitching them at the time, and they wanted to do a couple really cool things. And this was one of the first projects that I really wanted to try to mix those two things together with a little bit of edge. So I developed these designs, and this is an important piece because it'll kind of tie into some pieces later. But just walking through like my process, I've done a lot of work for, my work's not, it's not for everybody. I'm not getting calls from the bank for a rebrand. I'm not getting calls from healthcare or some of these type of companies. So it's a very niche thing. Athletics, distilleries, breweries, anything. I, I, I got a call from Harley Davidson last year for a project. It's those type of brands that really like my work. So it's a limited market, very specialized type of market. Um, but I get calls from uh, musicians and A&R folks and things like that, which is really fun. Um, but again, you know, this the whole thing I wanted to talk about tonight is kind of my journey. So I started here, and I really wanted to win with great illustration, custom typography, and design. And then um, when I did that, I was like, okay, uh, you know, some some people might say, okay, that's your specialty. Keep going. Just do that. Just do more of that. But the ceiling with just design for me wasn't there. So if so this is some work I did for John Deere while I was at EP. And again, while we got this client, and someone said, oh, we need a logo for a T-shirt. And I was like, why don't we just do the whole line? Why don't we just do an apparel line? Because my friend Corey was over here and he knew these guys. And I'm like, you know, why don't we just do the whole apparel line for these guys? And they sold it through. So it was one of those things where I was like always looking for that opportunity to insert my work into something and, see if it works. Um, and you guys might know, Liability Brewing in town. They brew some amazing beers, and when I was at EP, I was approached to kind of rebrand those guys and help them with some experience work and do their can designs. And those have been really successful for those guys too. But again, just trying to mix, really tight illustration work with, custom typography, and just to be weird, because these cans are weird. There's a tuna fish in here smoking a pipe, which is kind of fun. But that's the kind of stuff, uh, I think that works because you think of things you think of the most popular things in like video games or books. You think of Mario, you think of Nintendo and you think of Mario, and it's a plumber running around fighting a monkey that's called a donkey or whatever. Dr. Seuss is another great example. Is if you just twist things a little bit, you know, um, you become memorable. You could twist it too far too. But so again, just going through some of the illustration work. About 10 years ago, I decided, hey, I would really love, a goal of mine was, because I saw, Instagram was coming on, and I saw friends of mine or peers of mine or people in the industry that they started putting a lot of work on Instagram. And this was early on too. And and I was so excited about that. I'm like, this is great because I can throw stuff on Instagram and get like instant feedback from these people, and kind of fine tune the things that So some things that I thought were really great about my style weren't resonating very well. So I kind of fine tuned some things. Another thing I wanted to do when I was watching Instagram um, was to work for bands. There's this thing with um, music and art. It's like musicians want to be artists. Artists want to be musicians. That type of thing. So there's this really cool crossover where there's a mutual respect on either side. And I've got to work on a lot of really cool band work. But to get to that, how do you get into that? How do you start you don't just get a call from Metallica like out of the blue. You gotta have some work to prove that. Um, and another thing that I would say is uh, I would do the fake it till you make it kind of thing. So I created a fake band, and you'll see it over here called the Holy Smokes. The Holy Smokes isn't a real band, but I figured I'm going to make a fake band, and I'm going to give the band a bunch of fake posters, and I'm gonna put it out there as if it's real on Instagram. I want to see what happens. Well, it's crazy. I started getting calls from real bands that were like wanting to do some really cool stuff. You know, I've had the opportunity to work with Grand Ole Opry on some designs. So the one on the left was released. The one on the right was not released, but is one of my favorite designs. Um, and then you know, speaking of music, this is about the time that I was leaving EP and about to move to Tennessee. I got a call from uh, someone that represented Big Machine Records in Nashville, and they were like, "We want you to do some typography for this new album." And I was like, "Okay." And they're like, "Who is it?" I said, "Who is it?" He said, "Oh, it's Brantley Gilbert." I didn't know who Brantley Gilbert was, to be honest with you. Now I heard of his music or whatever, but apparently it was a big deal, which is a pretty big deal. Um, but and if so, I end up the really cool thing about doing something like this uh, for a band is if you get to do an album cover, typically you get the album like 3 or 4 months earlier than the public, which is really, really cool. It's a pretty big secret too, because so you can listen to the songs, you may be able to like, I think that one's going to be the hit or whatever. So it was really, really fun to do that. Um, but what's not good is, you start getting art by committee. Everyone has a big opinion of what they want on a project like this. So you don't have a lot of control. And while I'm really happy with some of the typography that I did with this, the lady that had given me the project was a big Game of Thrones fan, and she wanted the type to look like the Game of Thrones logo. So basically, that's why we kind of landed here. But really cool to do a project for these guys. Um, but again, if you're looking to get into designs for the music industry, it doesn't doesn't pay anything. So it's really just for you get a pat on the back and people think it's cool that you did it, but you don't really get to put much in the bank. This is a recent one I did for Epic Records for an artist named Jamie Ray. He does trap music. Anybody know what trap music is? All right, it's like country rap. It's like country but with beats, and it's really, really weird. But but anyway, so it's kind of that country street kind of vibe to it. So my job as a typography designer is to try to develop these text pieces so they really express the personality and the musical style of the artist. And this guy's, got a bit of gloss and all his teeth are all iced out. He's got an icy grill, Rick, icy grill. So, but it vibes with it, and they loved it. And Epic Records has become a recent client of mine, which is really fun. Um, here's another set that I did, and this one actually was a pitch. I was working with someone who worked closely with the band Old Dominion, and I did a bunch of designs for them. Uh, Again, I was slow at the time, and I was like, yeah, I'll throw some stuff at it because if it works, right? But if you don't, well, you got a bunch of really cool stuff that you can present to other people, and there's something really cool about having names in your portfolio that for for some reason when you do a serious project or a branding project or experiential project, they allow you to charge a little bit more, because you've worked on some of these other things. So it kind of adds to a kind of a pedigree thing. And then some more work. I got invited into an Al Jackson project, and some Eric Church work. I've done a lot of stuff for Eric Church, but I would say that, this was where I started. I always wanted to develop this illustration style, and I have. It's a very niche market, very unique market. But at this time, I'm like, well, I've got to figure out a way, to kind of monetize this and to kind of figure out how to do this. I mean, one way to do it as an entrepreneur would be to start a merchandise company. If I start a merchandise company, well, sure, now I accept these larger projects, these merchandise projects. Well, if you're a designer getting paid by the piece, it's not a lot of money. Now, if I were to take on this project and handle the printing and handle the other pieces, well, now all of a sudden, we're talking about a real deal thing. And then you get paid every time they print the design. So now it's taking one design, it's figuring out a way to monetize it, and then make a 20 times the amount of money just by handling. So that's when you bring in a merch partner to do that sort of thing. So those are some of the things I'm thinking about now. But I had worked at EP for a while, and I'm gonna, before I jump into experiential, I'm gonna show you a project that I did for anybody heard of Ober Mountain, Ober Gatlinburg at the ski resort. The guy that I was working with in Tennessee had purchased a ski resort, and they had some branding companies lined up to do something with that. If you know anything about this ski resort, it's like 60 years old, it's run down, it's falling apart, and but it's the only ski resort in Tennessee. And when you start thinking about brand strategy in a place like Ober, and then you think about where I've come from with like illustrative branding and typography and all that, you know, how do you take a 60-year-old ski resort and and brand that with a not just a flair, but honor the history of the park for one, but secondly, you know, if you've been to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and this is in Gatlinburg, you know, everything is yelling at you. Every billboard is yelling at you. Every brand is yelling at you. Ripley's is yelling at you. So everything you see is loud, you know. And people talk about disruptive. There's a term disruptive. Everybody wants to be disruptive. Well, sometimes that's not pushing the envelope. Sometimes it's backing it off. It's like taking it back. You know. So how do you do that in a crowded market like Gatlinburg? So the first piece I worked on was this custom typography and this logo. This logo is called the Sunflake, and that is meant to represent a year-round experience. So it's got the sun and it has the snowflake. But then when you talk about, and that's the tram. Oh, the tram was fun to design. That's one of the cooler things I've designed because and this entire brand, I really wanted it to feel like a designer in Europe and Switzerland designed this in like 1970, So that was really like I just pretended I was a designer in 1970 in Europe when I was doing this stuff. But it was really cool to design the tram. But when you talk about like, okay, how do you honor the park? Well, these posters are a perfect way to do that. They're super simple, one word, no tag, no copywriting, no anything, high energy, vintage style travel posters. So now you start to have like a little brand ecosystem that's working for this brand. And when you're driving around Gatlinburg, are you kidding me, man? These things jump out from everything because it's like nothing else that's around. And when you talk about disruption, that's disruptive. And this rebrand, when this launched, they had about 15, 18 billboards. Their revenues went up 40% that year. So it was a huge success, and a lot of people wanted to know what Over was about. The second piece to that was I honored the park and gave them an excuse to be kind of old and crappy, which is what they were. So I gave them a window by honoring what they were. I gave them a window to, get infrastructure fixed and develop an architecture style and work on those other pieces to kind of develop what that brand needed to be. Uh, Here's some of the attraction branding. They've got a killer zip line that's like 3 miles long up there. Again, custom typography and some of this. You see the SoCal coming through. You're going to see SoCal in my work a lot. And then, we're going to talk a little bit about experiential design. And again, when I was at EP, working on these um, sponsorship projects, we did a lot of things for like athletics. We did some LL Bean work, but um, I learned a ton when I was working with those guys about how to tell a story with a build. So not just with the brand. And as I started working through these things, I'm like, man, if I could just take my illustration work and the custom typography, and if I could meld it with, you know, I've always been a big fan of architecture and mid-century modern design. If I could just bring those two pieces together, man, I think I could have something here. If I could just tie those two pieces together. And this is very well received, this kind of mountain modern style, working with this, 1960s style illustration work, which was really well received as well. And then you start thinking through things. Hey, we want a deck. Okay, well, again, like let's work in that era. I like to design things in eras, and this feels very mid-century modern. Having these overlook decks, and so it was really fun with this project to not only think about the branding and how that comes together, but how that works with the architecture. And that kind of transitioned me into this place where I felt, very confident uh, that I could run one of these projects all the way through. It's just looking for the right project. And the guy I was working with at the time, he had an architect. He had a name for a brand, but he didn't know what it was. He wanted to launch a cider called Tennessee Stud. Now, this is a spot in Gatlinburg, right on the strip in Gatlinburg, a super high profile location. I mean, you can't walk by it without tripping on it. And it's got these big open doors. And they wanted to call it Tennessee Stud, and their architect was struggling with the concept. And this is one of those moments where I was like, all right, I see an opportunity here. I think I'm going to oversell myself and, try to win this gig, and I'll figure it out as I go, right? Because I had done some really great, things at EP from a conceptual standpoint, and I knew enough about architecture and about electric and plumbing and, spatial relationships between countertop heights and, how much space you need for traffic flow and all these things, and enough about storytelling where I was like, oh yeah, I can do that. It doesn't really work. Doesn't really work that way, really. But that knowledge was enough for me to kind of figure out the rest. So in Gatlinburg, there was this place a while back called the World of Illusions. If you've been to Gatlinburg, you'll understand. There's a lot of these 70s style rundown places like this. And this used to be a two-story hotel, probably in the 40s and 50s. Back then, Gatlinburg was a little different than it is today, with Ripley's and all the bigger names coming in. But my thought was, okay, I'm going to insert myself into this project. And the project at that point was they took the building that existed, that two-story hotel, and they stripped it down to the bones, and this is what I had. So this is what they had for me. And I was like, okay. And they had these windows and they had these doors that, are wide open to the street. And I started thinking through that. I think I was watching Tombstone at the time. I was working through this. This is the interior. So this is what I walked into. And I had a very, very small team. I had a team of 5 guys. I had a super and 4 guys that were there to build it. I was given anything I needed to work through the concept that I had presented. So I took this and I put a deck together, and I said, okay, what this should be is like a really fancy cider house that kind of feels like the 1880s or 90s. And it's a little like Tombstone, the big hanging curtains and all the fun stuff. And, I put a very visual deck together and went in there and sold it. And they were like, great, you know, uh, go make it. I was like, okay. So I went down there, and so these are some of the sketches that I had presented early on. Trying to figure out how to work with that box and these big open doors. They had these nano doors that are those doors that kind of slide open and shut. But when they're open, you've got this really great open uh, way to see, into the space. But problem is, it's the ceilings are 25 feet high, 22 feet high. So how do you work through that? And this was the first opportunity I really had to lean into both my experiential design, kind of my edgy style, some of the illustration work that I really love to do, and then just make something, just go make it, And there were really no rules. I really didn't have anybody except the CEO of the company hanging over my shoulder. They just wanted to get it open, and I just wanted to get it right, And I had a very small team, so I had to fight a little bit to get uh, to get what I wanted. It didn't cut any corners, and I think that was probably the hardest part. But this style was approved, and then I went, quickly into working through, what that brand was and those different elements. And these were in thinking about, okay, I'm going to tattoo this building like it's a body. I'm going to put things all over these walls. When you're working with a space and you have a lot of wall space, you can't fill it up with picture frames and art. You got to figure out a way to put large scale graphics on the walls or find an interesting way to cover things, or you're dead. People are going to walk in there and it's not going to feel like it's finished. So I made all of these different elements. The great thing about putting together a graphics package like this with experiential is you can sell them as other pieces. So they took many of these pieces and they have a whole merch line now, based on some of these illustration pieces that I created. And then I worked through package design as well. So this project from start to finish, I touched every single piece, including construction oversight and working on deals with vendors and everything. And there's, if you're kind of entrepreneurial in some ways and you sell yourself like this, you got to be that guy. When you're at an agency, you got a whole team and you can lean on other folks. But, this is really without a net. Like I really sold myself into a pretty scary thing, which I had to deliver on. So one of the things I wanted for this project, again, I was watching too much Tombstone at the time. One of the things I wanted was ornamental mirrors, and I had designed these bars with these big 6-foot openings um, on the front bars. And, I presented the idea of doing ornamental glass, but I didn't know if it was possible. But I wanted to go down the road and see if it was possible. So I called a friend of mine um, in New York, a guy that I'd met on Instagram and saw his work. I follow a bunch of guys that do ornamental glass work. And I called him up and I said, dude, I got a crazy idea. I need you to make 2 6-by-6-foot ornamental glass mirrors for this bar. I want them to say stud cider. I want this and that and the other thing. I love your style. I want you to just figure out a way to make them. How much is that going to cost? And he gave me a price on it. It was super reasonable. This is a guy that works for, Stranger and Stranger. I don't know if you're familiar with, high-end package design, but it's like the best package design studio in the world. And he didn't really need the cash, which was great for me because I'm like, great, so we can do this. So I put mirrors behind the bar that were just clean mirrors. And I said, guys, these are going to take forever. I ran the price through. The owner of the company said, great, the price was right. And I said, guys, I don't know how long it's going to take. It's going to take a while. They took a year and a half. They took forever. But meticulous glass work, 24 karat gold, reverse painting. Just a real masterful job this guy did. Um, these are largest, I haven't promoted it this way, but these are the largest ornamental glass mirrors in the U.S. behind this bar. We had custom frames made. The installation was a nightmare to get them in, because you're dealing with, 2 6-foot pieces of glass. They're probably 300 pounds each and super fragile. And he made them in New York. We had to get them here, without breaking. So it was dicey, but we got him in. But his name is Simon Meyer. If anybody's interested in looking that guy up, he's a master at ornamental glass work. Here's some of the process pieces. All of this work is everything you see here. So he paints the back with this material, and then all of the kind of glittery portions are acid etched. So it's all just layering these stencils and then etching acid as you go. And then he puts the gold leaf on the back and then paints it on the back, and then you flip it over and that's what you see. Yes, sir. No, no. I let him do his thing completely. Like, I completely trusted him, and I wanted him to feel that way too, because we had originally thought about collaborating. I'm like, oh, I'm going to do the horses, and I'm going to draw this, and I'm going to draw that. And as I talked to him, it was kind of funny too, because I talked to him, and I kind of felt like his tone, his mood changed a little bit about the whole thing. I just sensed that about it, and I was like, I really want this guy to just do his thing. Like, I'm going to tell him what the colors are and what things need to be, how things need to be said. And he showed me a bunch of his work, and I said, I like that style that you do very much. And then he would present me sketches, and I would approve things, and then he would go after it. But he's a great guy, man. I mean, it was a really great collaboration. I had to protect him from, the you know the corporate folks who were like, "Where is all this stuff?" So I had to battle. I had to battle a bit, because of this thing. But again, man, we just wanted to go at it. He wanted to get after it. He wanted to do something successful. He wanted to, say that he did the, biggest mirrors anywhere. And there they are hanging in the bar. That's Simon. He listens to death metal and makes like some of the most beautiful things you've ever seen. So it's pretty awesome. But end of the day, this was the big room that I walked into, and that's what I did with it. So a lot of the tricks here, since the ceiling is so high, how do you cover that space? So I purchased these chandeliers. It's funny, when you start putting them up high, they don't look as big, but to cut that room in half, I had these massive chandeliers hung about halfway down to kind of lower that ceiling. And then I painted the ceiling. I made the ceiling black with these tiles. Again, if you use darker colors in a room, it tends to shrink the room. So there's little tricks you can do to kind of make that all come to life. And you don't really see it on this side, but there are 20-foot curtains that are red velvet curtains hanging in each corner around the place, and steer horns. This is one really awesome piece that no one really knows about because they don't really promote it that way. But I had asked the guy, the owner at the time, because I like America, and I wanted a flag in here because we're going to have eagles and all this fun stuff, and it's red, and it brought a lot of color in here. But this flag that I begged for is a 1870. This is a 7-foot by 8-foot, 7 by 9-foot flag from 1876. It's 38 stars, and it hung over the Colorado State House, which was totally rad. And then each of these, all the art pieces you see, Buffalo Bill, and these are all like original pieces of art too that are in there. So a lot of support on that side, pulling all of those things together. So, and then some of the signage pieces, I got to use some really great signage designers and makers. And this place doesn't look nearly as good with those nano doors I was telling you about, but when the doors are open, you really get a vibe. It's really got a lot of edge to it. Yes, sir.
I was just curious, have you ever done like full interior design before this, or
My first project. Yeah,
amazing?
yeah, it's pretty scary. Um, yeah, it was scary, but again, I had enough experience and had been around it enough to know, how to sell it and how to, you know, how to figure it out and how to buy myself time if I didn't know something. And the other thing is, dude, never burn a bridge, man. Because the people that were your bosses when you go somewhere else, if they're your homies, they're going to be there for you. If you have a question or whatever, like just never burn a bridge. And if I was going to trip on anything, I knew I always had someone to um, uh, someone I could ask a question. To this day, again, EP, like some of the leadership over there and some of the guys are still great friends. And if I get stuck with a question or I'm in some room I don't understand, I can ask those guys, for a tone. So I'm going to go through one more quick one, guys. And then I'll stop rambling. But this is a quick project. Um, this is another project near. This is actually in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. I don't know if you guys ever been to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, but there's this place called the Old Mill. It's right. This is a really horrible building. It's really ugly, and it kind of looks like a Pizza Hut. And you know, what do you do with something like this? You know, so the guy didn't have a ton of money and wanted it flipped in about 8 weeks, and he wanted a concept for this. And I was like, okay, it's near the river. Um, I was into fishing at the time. I've been doing a lot of trout fishing. There's not a lot to do in East Tennessee, by the way, especially if you've been on every roller coaster and you're kind of like, it's over. What else do you do? So I'm off in the woods fishing. I was like, well, it'd be a good thing to do here, certainly to hide the building, but also to bring, a little flavor to it is, let's skin that place with river rock and let's hang some canoes from the front of it and let's get after some really cool branding. And you guys have probably noticed that architecture styles and colors. Everything used to be bright, cheery. It's amazing how many places you see that are painted black now or really dark colors. And so using this really really dark green uh, worked out really well. So when you look at the difference between that, and I wanted to get rid of the doors, and we've got some. Oh my gosh, such a horrible, horrible building. But this satisfied me. This was really fun, and I got to do these, kind of the vintage style. It's a great project for someone because I led this owner completely through the process. So this project was mine to build. I picked my architect. I picked my builder this time. I picked everything. I knew exactly what the budget was. I asked all those questions beforehand. So that cider house really helped. I've been down that road where I was like, okay, all right, So at this point, I'm the guy, and I just, I went out and just made this in about 8 weeks. Um, sorry, and I worked on the the wine ball designs, and I brought together some crest work and some really cool colors. They like this brand so much that the other Elkmont wineries will probably all end up being fishing themed winery. Here's what I'm going to jump back real quick. This is what the interior looked like. And when you're working on a project like this, you have 8 weeks and you have no money, what do you do with this place? So basically, you're going to gut this room, but you've got to keep all this stuff. I mean, these are all support beams. Um, these bars had to go because they've got 1990s, stink all over them. And of course, so we just emptied this room basically. But all this support structure, that had to stay. And again, no time, but I worked through how we could use different species of wood and tried to not spend a lot of money and pulled this design deck together for the contractor and for everybody. And I said, okay, this is what I want to do. And at this point, I have built enough where I know how much things cost. So I knew this place was going to be X amount of dollars, and that was acceptable to the client. And we moved forward after this. Here's some of the finished stuff. You know, these this this back wall that I had originally presented here with all these wood pieces. When you're working like on a project like this, you have to figure out ways to make things cool without spending a lot of money. And so I was like, okay, we got to do a feature wall back here, and I want it to be mountain shapes. I want it to be mountain shapes like this, but we have no money. So we went and quoted it. It was like 10 grand to have this company come and do some wood stuff. And I'm like, we can't spend that. We don't have that money because that's not in the budget. So I, we had a bunch of lumber left over, from building some of the other pieces around the place. And I was like, okay, uh, I'm going to go to the paint store and I'm going to get 6 different colors of paint. We're going to map this out on the wall. And we're going to make it. And I had the contracting crew make this feature wall and this feature wall on the other side of the building in about a day and a half. And they finished that out in about a day and a half. So this is this is another build that I did, and it's wild, man. When you work on something like this, I wanted some. These are called mountain laurel branches. It gives a really nice thing. Well, where do you find mountain laurel branches? Well, apparently you find them in Hickory, North Carolina, somewhere way up in the mountains. So I said, I need mountain laurel branches. And I said, this is what they cost. And they said, okay. And then I drove up there. Oh my gosh, man. I mean, I'm in the middle of the woods, buying a pile of sticks from a guy. It was a wild time. I saw an elk on the way back. It's like crazy. But this was a really fun one. I got to pick out. I had a nice budget for decor, so um, you know these are actual 1940s signs and original pieces, and figuring out how to use. Again, it's work on a budget. So I love these little details where you just go on eBay and buy a box of reels, and it makes for a really nice presentation. So some cool taxidermy, and I bought 40 boat paddles. I bought every single eBay auction out of boat paddles. Um, so that's kind of my story, guys. Like I started an illustration. Um, uh, I really wanted to build things and kind of bring branding and illustration together. And then I wanted to, use some of the building things is really fun. It's like Legos for adults. But I think the best thing about building something is day one. You open the doors, and I always like to go on day one when they open the business and just kind of hang around, and just kind of see how people react to the place. And it's probably one of the most rewarding things, especially the cider house. People, you know, with a place like the cider house in an area like Gatlinburg, they have kind of middle income, sometimes lower middle income clientele coming into those places. But you know, when people walk in there, they feel like, wow, for one, if you put this in Greenville, the cider house in Greenville, there's certain people aren't going to go in there. It's too fancy, whatever. But if you're in a tourist town, it gives you there are no rules. Everybody in that town gets to go into every store, no matter who you are. It's just the levels of social, whatever, stigma on anything. And people walk in there and they really feel special. They're like, because I would say if I leave you with one thing, and I think it's something Rick Rubin said is, art is a gift. You get to kind of choose who you gift that to, but art is a gift. And if it's done right and it's done with love and care, people really feel it. Um, and people feel like you did it for them. So uh, So that's it, guys. That's my story so far. I don't know where it goes next, but looking to build and brand some stuff. So that'll be in the mix. Thanks, guys. Does anybody have any questions?
How have you seen AI design skills design?
Great question. AI scares me a little bit, and probably a lot of people. I think that you know, uh, I spent 6 or 8 years developing an illustration style and a typography style, which to this point AI can't catch up with. You know, I think I think also there's a bit of a revolt against AI right now. I think there if you're a client using it for design, there's some things that people get on you about. You know, you heard of Netflix using AI for some things in one of their movies, and like there was an uproar from the public. You know, because obviously AI is going to the past and pulling on a bunch of work that other people have done, throwing something new together, and throwing it at you. Well, it's scary. I think people, clients that are looking for. I was talking to Ben earlier about if you're looking for more boutique work, I think that you're fine. I'm a premium product, really. So if Harley Davidson calls me, um, Harley Davidson's not going to use AI for a T-shirt. You know what I mean? Like it's not quite there yet. But I'm also aware that it's going to get very good. In 5 years or 3 years, who knows how fast? It's going fast, isn't it? It's crazy. Um, but who knows? I saw an app today as I was flipping through Instagram, and you take a picture of an empty room, and it gives you 5 options of we should do in the room. Now, I started reading the comments, and they're like, "Yeah, download that app. It sucks. It doesn't work. But again, like it can get there pretty quick. But I think um, I think clients that didn't really have or didn't really value top creative um, are probably the clients you didn't want to have anyway. You know, and I still think the premium clients are going to uh, use some hand drawn stuff or some custom crafted stuff, and you get a better. Again, AI is looking at the past and throwing some stuff together. So if you're forward thinking and coming up with a new way at something, um, I think it'd be all right for a little while. But I would say AI for me has been uh, amazing in other ways. Because the questions that I needed to ask about the tone in a room where I'm pitching something, or how do I respond to this particular line of questions about this, or I'm about to quote a year of my life, and I want you to break out every single month based on these criteria. Gosh almighty, you wouldn't believe it. So I use it for things like working through proposals and judging, tone of certain things, and it's been really interesting. I don't cut and paste text and write copy with it because it stinks. Again, it's not there yet, but it will be. Um, and if you're going to use AI copy, delete your double dashes. It's a dead giveaway. Yeah.
I was curious when transitioning from working in like more 2D design, because obviously that's still carried in design tools and everything. But do you find there was any more challenges moving into implementing your visions into a 3D space?
I would say, I would say, I would say I was worried about that, and then figured it out along the way. I had done enough 3D work when I was on the experiential team to kind of, I had enough confidence to work through it. Um, but again, like every project I go into, I always push myself a little further than what I can do and kind of figure it out as I go. Always pushing, because that's fun to be scared a little bit when you're doing something, it makes it more exciting. It makes the reward better too. So I bit off way more than I could chew on this. Um, and I took too long and I probably didn't approach the relationships around it and the leadership around it the right way because of maybe I was intimidated in certain areas and didn't know how to have some conversations around it. Um, so there's way there's ways that I would have done some things differently around this, but I was super thankful for the opportunity, and I think that once the doors opened, everybody forgot about all that stuff that I really didn't know going in, So I think a bit of both. Um, I've always had really good relationships with people along the way. Um, And when I started getting into the build work, it's weird. I've got this, if you look at my Instagram feed, I've got all this, like, all these skulls and snakes everywhere. And then all of a sudden, my feed just switches to like all these, like, what is this guy doing? So I took this like really fun illustration feed and probably lost half my followers doing it. But I think with, as far as recommendations, I would say I'm still working through that. I know enough people in the business where I can say, hey, it's been pitch work, So a lot of people that know me as an illustrator and brand guy, I'm letting everybody know, hey, I can run your project, I can build your space and help pick your architect and your contractor and all this other stuff. And I have enough of a body of work where, I have trust in that. Um, but it's a really, Jamie asked me to, come and talk to you guys tonight, and I told him, I said, Jamie, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. Like I'm transitioning. I don't even know. I just realized that the way that I'm presenting my work and pitching my work um, doesn't lead people to understand that I really built this place from scratch. I mean, I designed the bars. I designed where these POS systems go, and I knew where the credit card slot was, and I was thinking about the um, the employees and how high the tap heights were. Like I was really in there. I was really deep in there. So I think for me, I I'm pitching some after I've since I've done the cider house. I've got a couple of really interesting phone calls that I'm really excited about. Um, but yeah, I don't know if I totally answered your question. I think it's a bit of both, and I think I have some room for improvement on showing my process and how to present that particular thing so people understand it. Because you can, there are different ways to approach a build. I could just do a design deck and an interior design deck and a promotion, like uh, they call it a design detail deck and a brand deck. I could put a deck together and then my project stops. I pass that off to the architect and then they hire an interior designer. They do whatever they need to do. Well, of course, it never comes out quite the same if you do it that way. So I can do it that way. But I prefer to have a bit of oversight, work with the vendors, and make sure that the project that I designed is gonna feel like it should. So. Um, the favorite part of the project, I think, was just being done. It was really a relief. I mean, there's so much pressure. It was so much. I oversold myself big time on this. So I had to deliver. There's a lot of high level people taking a keeping an eye on stuff like this. And it was a relief to get it done, and for it to be as well received as it was. You know, so yeah, and I've had conversations with folks about design by committee and having a singular vision. Some of those things are tough to work through. I still have you know I have a very specific way I like to do things, a very specific style. Um, and I like to win in the pitch deck land. I really like to say, okay, this is exactly what this thing's going to be. Get it approved there, and then you don't have to fight so much, through the process. Sometimes things go so fast that you don't get the opportunity to do that. And then if there are pivots along the way and you haven't sold them in early, those are hard to deal with. Like these murals were something that uh, I knew the space needed to have, and I had planned them out. But there was a little pushback on those. They have to go in there. This place is going to look stupid if we don't put the murals there. Like it's part of the deal. Um, but yeah, I fought for what I wanted on this, and really happy with it. So uh, yeah, I've had people just send me a random email. Hey, I talked to the owner or the manager, and I was like, who built this place? And I get a random phone call from some guy saying, oh yeah, we want to do a general store in Indiana. Like, all right, let's talk about it. Um, so yeah, that's a beautiful place. It was a very very small team. It took a while, but the project had sat for a long time before I started it. So the pressure it wasn't that intense, and there wasn't an open date. It was just like let's move as fast as we can. But it was a small team, but everyone's very happy with it. I got a late start. I was in my late 30s when I started trying to come up with some style of illustration and custom typography, and I didn't really know where I was going. I was just going for it. I didn't really know. And I think the thought was, I'm not going to be 80 and wish that I had uh, done it different or whatever. Like I really wanted. I knew I was talented. I knew I had a lot. I had many gifts, and I just didn't want to waste them. So I think right now, as I get older, like I just want to. I want to take it as far as I can go. You know, um, and when yes, I haven't had a lot of bosses. You've actually we you, you came in late, but I um, yeah, I think that it's nice to work with people that are aligned creatively with your vision and that support your vision. Because ultimately, in a perfect world, I would love to be like only select clients who were aligned with the things that, you know, hey, I like your work. Let's work together. Well, that's going to work out great. Um, but sometimes you have to work with people that are fighting against you, and that's never fun. It was some of these projects have been tough, and you just you gotta be tough, man. You gotta be tough. You're gonna get pushed back on stuff. Corey's a great boss, by the way. Corey has been a big influence in my career as far as storytelling. He was the guy that brought me into the experiential world. And yeah, um, there you go, buddy. Yes, sir. Hi, Wade. Yeah. No, it's a great question. Um, I the iPad when it came out, especially the big one when they made the big one with the pencil and all that, it was so good. And it took videos of everything you drew. It was great. You could take this thing anywhere. You got to wear this weird little glove that kind of looks like an evening glove, like some weird glove. But I loved it. I loved working on the iPad. I still, I don't do nearly as much illustration work as I used to. Um, but yeah, sketching. We talked about AI a little bit. Um, AI can't break out a sheet of paper and start doing thumbnails. There's something really interesting about that. And I learned a long time ago when I first went to EP that you know if you sketch and if you draw early on, for one thing, client gets excited about that stuff. They feel like you're dreaming with them. They feel like they get excited. They feel like they're on the journey with you. You don't get locked into countertop specs and hey, that shouldn't be that color or that shouldn't be whatever. It's a dream. We're just dreaming together. We're just having fun. And clients really respond to that. So I don't think I do any branded projects where I don't show sketches first in black and white. They've got to be black and white because if it's a sketch, I drew that little horseshoe with the Tennessee stars in it, which is a super simple little thing, but that works great in a sketch. If it works great in a sketch, it's going to work great in 100 different ways. So if it works as a rough pencil sketch, it'll work. Um, so yeah, when the iPad came out, I was pretty stoked about it. Still use it a lot. Anybody else? Thanks, guys.